Hi, good morning, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Mental Health and Wellbeing in COVID-19 webinar series brought to you by myself, Theron Nightenfit, and Mark Baker from Mygrow. Happy Wednesday. If you are signing in South Africa or around the world, maybe it's a different day for you somewhere else. But anyway, we are really excited about this webinar today. We are going to be talking about relational connection in a time of social distancing. We have a guest who's going to be joining us today, a counseling psychologist, Sam Pretorius, who's going to be sharing some of her experience of what people that she has been dealing with over the last few weeks, what they've been dealing with, giving us a little bit of an inside scoop on some of the ways that some of her clients are responding to this time and perhaps what they're struggling with. I'll introduce her in a little bit more detail later when we get her on. Let me just quickly recap what we looked at in yesterday's webinar. The key concepts were emotional addiction and how that cycle works, how the neurons in the brain really wire themselves in a way that help us to see the world a certain way and to continue to see the world in certain ways as a result of that. We talked about how people want to feel good neurologically, what that homeostasis means in the brain and how those neural architectural structures work. Remember that key phrase we mentioned, neurons that fire together, wire together, and neurons that no longer fire together, no longer wire together. So we do have the ability to rewire some of those neural pathways in our brain. The key question that we asked you guys was how, we gave an answer for was how to override negative tendencies. And essentially, it's to use that ABCDE technique is one of the ways, and we walked you through that. We had Alex Kilgour on the show explaining a little bit about how that technique works, and we made that resource available on the Mygrow platform in the COVID-19 resources section. So if you haven't yet had a look at that, please head over and have a look at that. Today, we're going to be talking about, as I said, relational connection in a time of social distancing. And the things we're going to look at today are this question of, do we actually need relationships? I'll let the cat out the bag here. The answer is yes. We need relationships. And we're going to be talking you through some of the dynamics and some of the things that help us to see that that is actually very, very true for our experience. We're then going to be talking about our interdependent brains and how our neurology is actually it actually mirrors the fact that we do need each other in the world. And then we're going to look at a very helpful relational maturity continuum to see how we can really grow in our interconnection with other people. But without further ado, let me hand you straight over to Mark to give a stab at answering this question. Mark, do we need relationships?
Yeah, thanks, Theron. So great to be here with everyone. We made quite a strong case a couple of webinars ago in this series around the negative impacts of social isolation. In other words, what happens if you don't have relationships? But we want to really just make a strong case today for those of you that think, perhaps you don't need them, but you're not like in solitary confinement, which is what we looked at last time. And so I want to make just a little bit of a case, sharing some theory with you from psychology, neuroscience, and also just the stories that resonate with us. And the first one I want to share with you is just this slogan from the Jungle Book, Rudyard Kipling. That theme that keeps coming through. For the strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. And we know that the Jungle Book, certainly in the Western world, has just had such resonance with people in terms of relational dynamics. And then, of course, that gets echoed in an African context, specifically in a South African context, where the life of Nelson Mandela, from his social, cultural background, that's rooted in this concept called Ubuntu, which is, well summarized by John and Beatty there. I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am. And this concept of Ubuntu really talks about an interconnectedness and the crucial value of that in terms of who we are as humans. So that's just a little bit of the cultural and narrative things that stick out for us. But let's touch base on a little bit of psychology, whether we actually have a need for relationships. And there really is no better place to go than to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is one of the seminal motivation theories in psychology. Many of you will be familiar with this. If you aren't, essentially what Maslow did was he stacked needs in a hierarchy, starting at the very bottom with basic needs. These were physiological needs, you can see there, for food, for water, for warmth, etc. And then the next level of basic needs were safety needs. In other words, am I safe? Am I about to not die? And you can see on the right-hand side there, these are the most basic needs that we have as humans. And as soon as each of these needs are satisfied, according to Maslow's theory, the next level of need then becomes most pronounced in the person's life and becomes the focus of motivation. And what I want us to see there is that as soon as we get past our physiological needs and our safety needs going up, the next level of needs, once we are safe and fed, in other words, if you live in a home where you can lock the door, and if you have had food today and water, then the very next set of needs that become most prominent for you and for me are psychological needs. The first level of those needs are belongingness and love. This is relationship. This has got to do with how I am in relation to others, and it becomes the most prominent need. And then, of course, there's esteem needs and self-actualization needs. But all I want to illustrate here is that really, once we are fed and once we are safe, which is the majority of us listening into this webinar, our next most prominent level of needs become these psychological needs for relationship, for belongingness and love. And so really it's crucial for us psychologically. Theron, it's bringing to mind for me one of the research studies that we've touched on in the Mygrow curriculum, the Harvard study of adult development. That really made an impression on you. Can you just give us a summary of that?
Yeah, I think maybe our viewers have heard of this. If you haven't, this is one of the most phenomenal studies that I've ever come across. It's called the Harvard Study of Adult Development, and it has been going for 80 years already. I think 82 years, if I'm not mistaken. It started in 1938. And essentially what they have done is track the lives of people from, in 1938, they chose a group of teenagers, 724 men, if you can call teenage boys men. They tracked their lives from then until they died. At some point, when those people had their own children, they continued the study into the second generation, studying all the lives of the children as well, to the point that now the people in the second generation are getting towards their very late years in life. And they've done extensive studies every year on these individuals. In the 70s, they actually added in the wives as well, and the whole study became bigger. But they basically did interviews with them every year. They've done physiological assessments and blood tests and brain scans and things like that, all with one question in mind. What is it that makes people happy? So it's a phenomenal research project that's been going on for 80 years. There's nothing like it in the world. JFK, John Kennedy, the American president, he was actually in the very first group of people. There's a little interesting piece of trivia. Anyway, what's fascinating about it is that the one major finding, the thing that they have come out with as being essentially the one major finding for this whole study, is that good relationships keep us happier and healthier. And this isn't just, as you can see from my next slide, this isn't just with Harvard graduates. This isn't just the Ivy League cream of the crop. They did this across the spectrum. They got people from the inner city slums in Boston, and they tracked these two different groups in different socioeconomic demographics. And essentially, the findings are the same. Regardless of income, regardless of gender, it is healthy relationships that make us happy. They help us to live longer, and they make us actually have healthier lives in every sphere of what it means to be a human. So if we look at this question of do we need relationships, I think it's very clear that the answer is yes. We've looked at that sort of philosophically, culturally, what is our human experience. We looked at Ubuntu and some of those other things that really resonate with humans, and we've looked at it psychologically with Maslow's hierarchy, and here we can see that really mapped out in this longitudinal study with all of these individuals that the Harvard study has done. Now this actually takes us on to our second theme of today's webinar, which is the interdependence of our brains. You see, if this is true that we do need each other, then we would expect to see that in the actual physiology of what's going on in our brains. So Mark, can you walk us through what you'd like to share with us around how we are actually interdependent with each other, and how that is shown through our brains?
Yeah, thanks, Theron. I think some of the important concepts that I think are worth having in the back of our minds come from some of the writing of Daniel Goleman. It wasn't his research, but it certainly was what he wrote about You'll remember, those of you that read a little bit in psychology, he wrote that first book on emotional intelligence. Then he wrote that book, Emotional Intelligence at Work. And then he wrote his third book, Social Intelligence. Because at that stage, neuroscience had developed considerably for us to understand this little part of the brain that's being pointed to there by the yellow arrow called the amygdala or amygdala. And essentially what neuroscientists were finding was that this part of the brain is what essentially gives us our subconscious memory. And it starts it interprets the world a little bit like a neural Wi-Fi. If you like, it's looking for signals from the world around it to see what it should most urgently tap into. And of course, it's helping us to respond to any kind of threat in the world. In the last webinar, we saw 66% of this, or 2/3 of the amygdala, is just looking for any kind of threat in the world around it. And so I want to just share with you one absolutely incredible thing that gets shared about the functioning of the amygdala. And it's got to do with this concept of affective blind sight. What that is essentially there are some people that have damage or trauma to a part of the brain called the visual cortex, which is right on the back side, the very leftmost part of the brain. What this means is that the person's eyes still function. They are able to take in the information into their brain, but they can't interpret what it is that they are seeing. So to all intents and purposes, they are blind, but it's not because their eyes don't work. And there's a little set of neurons that run from a part of the brain called the thalamus straight to the amygdala, that the thalamus being a little bit like the switchboard of the brain. And before we need to even interpret what we are seeing, the amygdala helps us to gauge whether there is a threat around us. And what affective blind sight is a term that's been coined where people who have this blindness because of damage in the visual cortex of the brain, they're able to pick up the emotional responses of photographs that are shown to them. So if they look at a photograph of someone who's angry, they will be able to start picking up on that. And some of the neuroscientists have been able to track that the brain starts firing this kind of threat response that someone's angry, and yet they won't be able to tell you what they're seeing. So affective blind sight is someone who has the inability to see because of damage to a certain part of the brain, but because their eyes still work and the amygdala still works, they are picking up on the emotional climate around them. And so what's really key for us is to just have a look at how our interdependent brains seem to pick up on the emotions around us, and it creates this term that's called emotional contagion, where different people that are in the world around us, their emotions become somewhat contagious. And I remember doing some work a while ago with Dr. Peter van Jaarsveld, who used to share about some research that was done on the London Underground, where people were able to pick up on the emotions of other people in the carriage around them. And you and I know this, we can relate to this. If somebody comes into a meeting at work, or if someone comes home for the day and they're in an angry mood, suddenly you start picking up on that anger. They haven't said anything, they haven't done anything, you just start picking up on it. You might also experience yourself being in danger, and you start, you start feeling those hairs on the back of your head. So there seems to be within our brains this ability for emotion to be contagious. And a great example of this, just some silly little examples therein are, people crying at a funeral when they see somebody else crying and sharing, or yawning when you see someone else yawn. There are these neurons known as mirror neurons that pick up other people's emotions and start allowing us to do that. I see you yawning there, and you're trying to get me to yawn, just talking about it. And I mean, you'll know this from a child. If you've ever played with a little child and they start giggling hysterically, or Theron, I know your wife Debbie at times just starts laughing uncontrollably, that tends to be contagious, and we pick up on that. So all I wanted to illustrate here is that our brains are very much interdependent and interconnected through the amygdala. Then one more thing I just want to share, Theron, is I don't think we can have a conversation around interpersonal dynamics without just touching on some of what Stephen Covey was writing in his 7 Habits book around this journey to maturity and what relational maturity looks like. Because we start off our lives on the very left-hand side there as very dependent. Some people stay through their lives very dependent. But what the media has set up is that we can move to a place of independence. And I frankly think Hollywood has made us think that once we are financially independent or even relationally independent, then we are more mature because we're not a little child anymore dependent on our parents. But actually what Stephen Covey was saying, and I think this was deeply insightful and still applies to us, is that really the state of highest maturity is really one where we can understand a mindset of interdependence. That I am who I am because of the way that I interact with others. And that really is at the foundation of Ubuntu, at the foundation of, the strength of the pack is the wolf, at the foundation of some of this emotional contagion for us neurologically. So this mindset is key, Theron.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think that's very helpful. I remember growing up thinking that becoming independent was the goal, but actually interdependence is what we're aiming for.
Yeah.
All right, I think it's time for us to get our guest on for today. Sam, can you hear us? Can we get you on the call? There you are. Perfect. Let me introduce Sam quickly. Sam is she runs a full-time practice as a counseling psychologist. She also lectures. And she's a mother, she's a wife, she loves chocolate and coffee. So I love Sam. Sam's my kind of human. Now, Mark and I have, over this webinar series, we've been talking you guys through just some of these constructs and some of the theory around what people will be experiencing in this time. But Sam is actually on the front lines. She's there in the trenches, as it were, helping people process what it is they're experiencing and feeling. So we thought, who better than Sam to get on the webinar and to just ask her some of her experience of what she is dealing with as she tries to walk with some of her clients. Recently, Sam has actually moved her practice online. So if you are someone who's feeling like you could really benefit from this kind of counseling support, then please search for Sam online. It's sampretorius.com. And she didn't ask me to say this. In fact, she specifically said, I'm not asking you to say this, but let me say it. She has reduced her rates for this season because, of course, everybody is concerned and a little bit anxious financially. And there's quite a financial impact of what's happening. She has reduced her rates and is trying to make her services more available to people online. So go visit sampretorius.com. I'll spell it out for you. It's SAMPRETORIUS.com. So check it out if you are looking for, if you feel like you could do with some of this help. Okay, thanks, Sam, tell me, how has your experience been over the last few weeks as you've been dealing with this journey?
So I think the anxiety is heightened in every single person I've spoken with, whether they're children, teens, or adults. People who had existing anxiety, it's much more exacerbated. Those who weren't anxious are now anxious. And linking it with today's topic, a lot of it has to do with the social aspect of lockdown and what it means. Yeah. So people are feeling, or they're expressing feelings of anxiety around being alone. We don't often spend this much time alone. It's very unnatural, actually. And we don't spend this much time alone. So feeling anxious, particularly those people who are living alone and doing lockdown physically on their own. There's a lot of concern about how to maintain relationships during this period. People are used to connecting with their colleagues and friends and family on a regular basis. And now they can't do that. So what does that mean for the relationship? Is it going to break down? Will it last? Can it be sustained through this period of lockdown? Yeah. And there's also definitely a sense of loneliness, particularly for those who are on their own. A definite sense of loneliness. It might sound a bit dramatic, but even people feeling a little bit unloved. Because also everyone is stressed and everyone is going about their lives trying to make this work. So perhaps people are reaching out less than they would have in the past. Yeah. Something else I was thinking about, if you think about love languages, which I'm sure most of us have heard about the 5 love languages. If you think about someone whose love language is quality time, and you're used to spending that with friends and family, and that's how you get your love tank filled up, and now you can't. It actually leads to feeling quite unloved, whether it's conscious or not, but actually feeling quite unloved. Yeah. Another stress that's put on relationships is some people have had to choose where to spend their lockdown. So they've been invited by friends or family, normally family, to come and spend the lockdown with them. And they've chosen, for whatever reasons, to decline that invitation. And I've actually seen that cause quite a lot of conflict in one or two families, where it's seen as quite a rejection. You know, we've extended an invitation to you. Why are you choosing to be on your own or to be with your friends rather than us as your family?
Well, that's so interesting. I mean, I hadn't even considered that would be part of the dynamic. You know, you think about all these things, like how an introvert is going to deal with this, but you don't think that, someone's actually made an invitation and it's been rejected and now feelings have been hurt. Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah. Okay, my next question for you is there, I don't know if this is even a thing or not, but so often when we deal with situations like this, we're given a timeline. If I just look at the virus itself, they tell you, day 1, you'll feel this, you'll sore throat, and, you know, a little bit later, a fever or whatever. I mean, I'm not the doctor. Maybe I'm getting that timeline wrong. But generally speaking, as they talk you through the timeline there, you can expect symptoms or things like that. And sure, it's not the same for everyone. Is there anything like that when it comes to the emotional and psychological impact? Can you say, research tells us that on day 1, you'll feel this, on day 2, you'll feel that, on day 3, anything you can share around that?
Okay, so that's a really good question. And in typical psychological, the way psychology applies in life, it's probably different for every person. So sorry, that sounds a little bit airy-fairy. Yeah. But I do think we can expect certain characteristics as time goes by. I read an article the other day that was comparing the emotional experience of lockdown to the process of grief, or the stages of grief. Okay. And for anyone who knows anything about grief and loss, the most famous model of grief and loss is Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. And I think it makes sense that we would follow a similar pattern. So firstly, you've got denial. So if we look at it from a social perspective, so denial, like, this can't be real. They're not really telling me I can't see my friends for 21 days. This can't be real. Yeah. Then you move into bargaining. And you go, well, okay, maybe it won't be that bad. Maybe if I do the social distancing really well, then the curve will flatten and I can get back to normal life. And then after we move into a stage of anger. We could be angry at the government for the decisions made. We could be angry with other social powers that be, just angry with ourselves, angry with the world in general. And then the next stage is that of depression. So from a social standpoint here, we would expect sadness, loneliness, those quite distressing feelings to come up in that stage. Yeah. And then moving into the 5th one being acceptance. When you realize, okay, this is the reality, I can't change it. How can I deal with it in a proactive way? Yeah. And then one of Kubler-Ross's colleagues, Kessler, actually, after Kubler-Ross had passed away, added another stage to the model, and added the stage of finding meaning, because he said, I don't want to just get to the point of acceptance. I actually want to get to the point of finding meaning or making meaning of it. So if we can find some type of meaning in this, that can be helpful. So, but just to point out, with any type of process like this, when it comes to human beings, it's never linear. We don't go bam, bam, bam from one to the other. We're going to oscillate. So we might be in anger today, depression tomorrow, and 2 weeks time acceptance, and then oscillate back. So it's a very dynamic process. But even just knowing the different stages, it doesn't have to be linear. Yeah. But just knowing them makes you aware of what you may be feeling. And of course, with grief, it's not as if you go through grief in 6 days. One day. No, exactly. Everyone's different, as you say. But something that I thought was quite interesting was when this all started, when we got to just about before lockdown, there are lots of psychologist groups online, and one of them an organization made a call for psychologists and social workers willing to do some pro bono counseling, obviously virtually, for healthcare workers, your doctors, your nurses, your paramedics, etc. And I put my hand up for that. And then we got an email yesterday from the organization coordinating it to say, while the hospitals have all been very grateful for the offer, that not no one, but very few people have actually taken up on the offer. And I was thinking, well, why might that be? And I think we might be in the denial or honeymoon phase, where people are saying it's a bit of a novelty at first, oh, I get to spend all this time with my children, I get to work flexi hours, this is quite fun. Yeah, I don't have to wear like smart clothes. Exactly. You can just dress from the top up for webinars. You can, but the novelty is going to wear off soon. And when I say soon, it's going to be different for different people depending on your circumstances.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're someone who is experiencing lockdown in a 3-story mansion in Clifton, it might be very different from someone in a 1-bedroom flat versus somebody in a shack. I mean, it's going to be so different for everyone. Are you trying to work during the lockdown? Are you connecting with colleagues during the lockdown, or are you doing this on your own? Perhaps you're a teacher and you can't physically teach, so you're doing this on your own. You're completely isolated. So I think that will impact which of those stages you move through and how quickly and when.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay, so let's get practical here. You're obviously in the business of helping people process this stuff and giving them practical ways to move forward, giving them tools and resources to really make the most of this time. So what can you share with our viewers, or what have you shared with your clients to really just get practical now?
Yeah. I think I've said to everyone, we're actually so fortunate that this has happened in the year 2020, where we have technology. And look, I mean, I'm not naive to think that everyone has access to Wi-Fi and data, etc., which then, of course, makes it so much more difficult. But the people who are listening to this webinar probably have access via these platforms. So I'm going to speak mainly to that. So thankfully, we do have technology at our fingertips. Yeah. And this is a time where we need to embrace technology. Sometimes, like, I have a love-hate relationship with technology. I'm loving it for the most part because it's at least keeping me socially connected to my people. Yeah. So I think WhatsApp groups are such a fantastic platform, or such a fantastic resource. You know, you can send obviously just your normal text messages, but you can send videos and voice recordings, emojis, GIFs, all those types of things. Of course, we've got our video calls. Video calls can be so helpful right now. And they don't have to be one-on-one. Of course, they can be groups. So at the moment, people are using a whole bunch of different platforms. We've got Google Hangouts, we've got House Party, we've got Meeting Room, we've got Zoom, so WhatsApp, FaceTime. There's so many different platforms depending on your preference. So I think if you're not tech savvy, I would say rather use this as a time to upskill yourself a little bit, and so you can actually connect with your people in various ways. Yeah. I think it's quite nice to build in, just for our general psychological well-being, some type of routine. So if you know that you connect with X person at 5 o'clock every day or once a week, my husband and I tonight, we're joining a group of friends, 7:30 via Zoom, and we're going to connect over a glass of wine and just connect. And we plan to do that every Wednesday.
Digital wine
club, absolutely. I mean, it could be a coffee date with someone or a few people. Yeah. The one thing I was
sorry, before you move on, I just want to share that. I mean, my wife is doing that as well. She every day at 4 o'clock, there's a routine. Yeah. I don't know how many ladies there are in this call. But probably 5 or 6 of her friends are all every day at 4 o'clock meeting, and so I get kicked out of the office for that section. Can't be listening in. Can't be listening.
No, definitely not.
But I think that's also possibly why we're nationally having such problems with internet, because everybody is on video calls.
Of course, we're all using it. The other thing I was going to say, something that came up in some of my sessions this week or over the last 10 days, is that we're kind of running out of topics of conversation other than COVID-19. Yeah. So we're becoming a little bit, look, I think we're oversaturated and we've reached saturation point, and we're also becoming a bit boring. So when you're connecting with someone, you've set up this FaceTime, but you don't have that much to talk about because, well, I worked as much as I could today, and no, I haven't gone to the shops yet, and what else is there to really talk about? So something I was thinking about to mitigate this is to meet up over a particular activity. So I've heard of people playing Uno. I've heard of people playing Pictionary. Another way to do it, I know some friends of mine who they are doing a series club. So it's 2 couples. They connect over a video call, just catch up on the day. Then they decide on a series they're going to go watch an episode of. Watch it, and then afterwards they reconnect and they discuss it. So you're talking about something other than COVID. Yeah. Another way to do that for those who like to read, you could decide with a group of friends, let's all read whatever book it is, and then reconnect in, I don't know, it depends how quickly you read, reconnect in a week and you discuss the book. So I think just bringing something other than this topic to the social space is a good idea as well.
Yeah, I mean, in the webinar yesterday, we were talking about just our bias towards negativity. And when our whole conversation is dominated by COVID-19 and the fear and the anxiety around that, we're not really giving ourselves the best shot at developing some personal resources to really flourish in this time. So I love these suggestions of yours.
Yeah, I think we have to just add some variety to the conversation. Otherwise, it's the time of social connectedness actually feels a bit draining.
Yeah.
So, you want to use your connectedness, your connection in a healthy way. And then just something else for some people who aren't crazy about the telephone or video calls, and they prefer things to be asynchronous. You could even just send emails to friends. You send an email and then the next day they reply. So it's not as in your face. It depends. And then the other thing, one more thing I wanted to add. And I was also just thinking, reach out to people that you haven't reached out to in a while. I think no one can say at this point during lockdown they didn't have time. So if there's someone that you're thinking, I really wish I had caught up with so-and-so, well, why not do it now? There's nothing stopping you now. So connect with people that you perhaps wouldn't have thought to. And then lastly, also connect with people who you think perhaps are on the outskirts of social circles. Perhaps people who don't have a family to check in on them every day. And perhaps just send that WhatsApp to check in on them. And also that altruistic side will also have a positive impact on you and your mood.
Perfect. Thank you, Sam, so much. It seems like as I hear everything you've been saying, the one theme that comes out for me is intentionality. Be intentional. There's so many different ways we can apply that, but if we can just be intentional, then we'll be able to see some positive coming out of this. Yeah. Anyway, thanks so much, Sam, for joining us. We will catch up with you another time. If anyone is interested in visiting Sam's website to see if she can perhaps be of any help to you, please do go to sampretorius.com. And as I said, we'll make that link available through our other social posts and things. Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Darren.
Okay, bye. Just to remind you, if you haven't yet gone to sign up for the free offering that Mygrow is making available on the Mygrow website, please head over to that. You can see here mygrow.me, www.mygrow.me. Top right-hand corner, there's a little tab that you can select and have access to the Mygrow platform. Then, of course, when you're on there, you can go down to the COVID-19 tab on the left-hand menu bar and make use of some of the resources that we have made available there, and of course catch the reruns as well.
Can you share, Theron, that we'll put up a worksheet in the extra resources on that site of some of the ideas practically that Sam Pretorius recommends for how to connect relationally in this time. So that'll be up there probably in the next 24 hours or so.
Yeah, I just want to say as well, again, guys, I just want to sincerely apologize for some of these internet issues that we seem to be having. I can promise you we are doing everything we can to bring you the best quality webinar. We just have a lot of challenges. We are tapped out with all of our service providers as to how fast they can make our line because of the demand that is out there with everybody using internet at home. So we really are working on it. Thank you so much for being gracious and for bearing with us. We really do appreciate it. Now, you may be alone at home, you may be with others, but we're all in this together and we can make the most of this time. Thanks, guys. We will see you for tomorrow's webinar at 11 o'clock. Till then, keep well.
Cheers, everybody.